everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this week on 1854 Presents. As always, I'm Zoe Harrison. I'm a creative producer here at 1854 Media, and I'm very excited today to be introducing two of our ones to watch this year. We have Michael Swann, hello Michael, and we have Anna Zibelnik. So as always, there'll be a Q&A at the end, so if you're a member you're watching on the 1854 Presents website, you can let us know any questions you might have in the box below, or just let us know where you're watching from. We love to say hello and see where everyone's watching from. And if you're watching on Facebook, do feel free to let us know where you're watching from and say hello. We'll get through as many people as we can at the end. So a little bit about two lovely people we have in front of us here. Anna is a photographer currently based in the Netherlands. She's recently completed her MA from the University of Leiden, where she studied film and photographic theory. Through her work, she primarily explores the themes of death, immortality, and the relationship between photography and extinction. She's part of Parallel, European photo-based platform, Haute Photography Talents, and was selected as the GUP New Talent of the Year 2020. And Michael is a Bristol-based photographic artist who has recently completed a master's in photography at UWE. His work explores aspects of religious belief, mysticism, and phenomenology. Is that the correct pronunciation of that?
Yeah.
Great. He aims to understand how photography can be used to communicate such themes, and he has been shortlisted for the BUP BUP Award and Show Off. Yes, BUP Award and the Show Off exhibition in Krakow Photo Month 2020. So absolutely delighted to have you both here. So as I mentioned briefly, both are two of our ones to watch this year, and are also part of the Futures Digital Festival alongside Elena Maria Fries, David Uzochukwu, and Agnieszka Sigid. So for those of you who haven't seen any of the work, you can take a look at their websites, obviously, and you can also come along to the Futures Digital Festival, which will be running throughout the month of October. And if you'd like to find out more about the festival, you can take a look at the website futures-photography.com. So it's futures and then like a little photography.com. So do have a look. There's lots of great things coming up. As always, keep up with upcoming events, awards and commissions. Subscribe to our newsletter in the box below. And if you miss a live stream, we will of course be posting the videos in our archive as we go along. So that's everything from me. So hello, Anna and Michael. How are you both today?
Hi. Yeah, good.
Great to have you both here. I'm sure everyone is very excited to see you both. So very difficult question to start off with, and one that we were speaking about beforehand that it's very hard to describe. So broadly speaking, how would you describe your photographic practice to people who aren't aware of your work?
Yeah, that is a pretty difficult question. I think I would describe my practice as, apart from the kind of points you said in the introduction, interested in themes around spirituality, mysticism, and philosophy, and trying to work out ways that photography can be used to visualize those ideas. I've always been really interested in abstract expressionist painting, and I really like the idea that through painting and through various forms of art, you can express things that aren't necessarily visible or metaphysical. And I kind of hope that, or I try to approach that through photography and play with the limits of photography in that sense.
Fantastic. And Anna?
Yeah, I could say that more or less I have this one topic that I'm interested in, and I've been circling around it now for some years, and at the same time I changed my approach quite a lot. For example, I recently switched from analog to digital, and my old project, which I'll be mostly talking about today, Where the Ones Turning, was about the fear of death. So it took a very human perspective on the topic. Whereas now where I'm going is more like, it's much less anthropocentric, and I'm trying to, it has a more scientific touch to it, which is partly also because in the last 2 years, I studied photographic theory, like you said, and I think that certain research methods have gradually found their way into my work, and yeah, it changed a lot in how I construct the narrative and how I make the project happen.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So, you know, another difficult question to follow up with that is, what drives you both to create work?
Yeah, I think I can connect that pretty much to the first question. I think it's the topic always. Like I get obsessed by something and then I just want to go into it as far as I can. And I find photography to be a very fitting tool to do this research.
Mm.
It's not that I necessarily want to take images. I also sometimes I want to write a text, and that fits better. But in this case, it's been that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I'd say exactly the same thing. I love the research side of it, and the reading, and the kind of developing ideas and making links between things, and I guess just becoming completely obsessed with one particular subject or one kind of line of thought. And then photography is sometimes almost like an afterthought, where you think, okay, how can I take what I've learned or been reading about, or that I find fascinating, and then put it out there in a visual sense. Yeah.
Practicing for?
I've been practicing for about 12 years, I guess. I studied my BA. I think I graduated in 2012, and then I did the foundation course and stuff before that. Kind of on and off in terms of making actual bodies of work, but yeah, I think photographically I've been working for about 12 years.
Wow.
Much less experience. I did my BA in graphic design, finished in 2018. So I could say that I'm seriously doing photography for about 3-4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I had the interest before, so it's not completely fresh, but let's say professionally.
Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, we were both speaking a little bit earlier about how both of your work is actually quite visually similar, which we will come on in a little moment to share some of your work. So how would you both describe your creative process, which again, another big question to start off an interview with, but how would you describe kind of, well, maybe not in full, but in brief, but from conception to the research to kind of beginning to come up with creative ideas to, you know, the completion?
I think for me, going back to the idea of research, I think that's where it all really begins, and trying to build as much of a foundation before going to shoot as possible, so that when it comes to actually shooting, I can kind of rely on my intuition a bit and kind of fall back on just letting wherever I am. Like, for example, with the work that I was that we'll be showing today, I was in 2 locations that I'd never been to before, looking for something very specific. But at the same time, also trying to just follow my instinct, I guess, or follow my intuition. And so for me, yeah, the process is that kind of half and half, get everything in my head and in my subconscious, so that when it comes to actually shooting, it can be a bit more free. And then the editing and the packaging it up and putting it out there in the world is kind of the bit that I find a bit daunting and difficult, but yeah.
Amazing.
I would also say that the research is obviously very important, but what's also important is that you forget about it once you have done it and once you know what you're talking about, so you can actually take the images that are a bit more spontaneous and not completely illustrative of what you just read. At least for me, it's like that. And in this project, I had to go a bit further from just forgetting about the theory. I actually started reading literary works, so something completely, well, not unrelated, but at least very different in nature. And in the end, I ended up looking for sentences that triggered images. So sentences that I could connect somehow to the topic of that, or that triggered me personally. And I saw images by following those clues, let's say.
Anna, should we talk a little bit about your project?
Sure.
Okay, let me just get it up here. So while I'm getting this up, Can you tell us a little bit about, I know we kind of covered about more generally your work, but can you tell us a little bit about how this project in particular started?
Mm-hmm. So the project started in 2018 within Parallel photo platform, which is a European organization which brings together curators and artists and photography institutions or galleries. So it was a little bit different from how I would normally do it, because I had a very clear timeline and a clear structure of how I will present it even before I actually finished the project. So I was definitely, I had to do it very fast, but in the end it somehow worked out. Yeah, but what was I would say the trigger point for it was something I did before while I was still doing graphic design. It was a research project about blue zones, which are the areas in the world where people live very long. And I spent some time researching that those communities where people have I would say, a completely different relation to that as we do here. And I found that very inspiring to go a little bit deeper into the fear that we experience, because for them, like one of them was Ikaria in Greece. I felt that they were really at peace with it. They were really okay with the end coming whenever it does. So that was the trigger, I would say. It was not something more personal, but of course at one point when you spend so much time with it, it also becomes about you.
Of course. And you know, forgive me if you've already kind of answered this question, if you think so, in the last question, and it's quite a morbid one, but you know, with a project being about life and mortality, of course the idea of death is very present in the work, and I was just wondering, is death something that has always interested you, or is it just something that comes along with these ideas of life and mortality?
Yeah, well, I think it's to an extent, you know, it affects everyone, so everybody should be interested or is interested. But yeah, I mean, I think it was just a line of things that I did in the past that's kind of led to it. It became logical at one point to make a project about it.
I think if someone says that they don't spend any amount of time thinking about the idea of death and dying, I think that they're living in a different world to the one that I'm living in, because I think especially at the moment it's becoming very present in a lot of what we're seeing in the news at the minute. So again, sticking on such morbid topics, you know, for as you said, for something that does happen to everyone eventually, and it's something that I think whenever you come to a certain stage in your life, you have you know someone that has experienced it to some extent, but it's strange that even though it is something that is so universal, it remains such kind of an abstract and delicate concept in all of our how we understand it. And you know, how did you approach kind of visualizing this in your work? And you know, was it something that you were conscious of kind of showing it delicately, or did you want to show it honestly, or what was your approach to kind of want to showing it?
Well, I can say that in the beginning I used to have quite a detached position. I wanted to do it about other people's fears, so I interviewed a lot of individuals who suffered from any kind of death trauma or just a bad experience or anxiety. And when interviewing them, I figured out they have really different visuals attached to it. So if I was looking for this one image of that, or of how people, what kind of visuals people relate to it, it became much too broad to make it into a project. So I figured that if I want to make something coherent and something that is going to speak to the people, I have to step in personally and start from my own stories and things that I relate to it. That's also why I ended up doing it in Slovenia, because I could connect to the cultural space much more than here in the Netherlands, where I just moved when I started to make it.
That was actually my next question, because it does definitely feel like it's all shot in the same place. It feels a bit like a community whenever you're going through it. Was that conscious that you wanted it to feel a bit like a community, or was it just something that happened?
No, definitely not. I didn't set any strict rules to myself. I took photographs in the UK. I took them here in The Hague, but in the end, what I ended up choosing, or what felt right or the most honest, was the things that I made at home. So I think it was not so much conscious as it was, I could just relate to it better. I know it better.
And so a couple of like technical themes that come up in your work. Repetition is we can flick through the work that it's here. You know, repetition is clearly very important in this project. Why was that something that you thought that was necessary to incorporate as a tool in this project, and what did you hope to kind of achieve with this tool?
I would say there are two aspects of this repetition. One is the hands, which are the most present. So you have this gesture of turning hands, which repeats throughout the series. I used to include it in many different ways. If it's shown like this in a linear narrative, I just use separate images, but in some cases, I also repeated them infinitely. So printed a lot of little hands and like was sticking them around the exhibition's place. Or in some other cases, I had the projector flipping through them. Or there's also this flipbook device, which maybe we can also show for a second, which has a kind of clock mechanism, and there's this repeating sound of it. So in this case, the gesture means death in American Sign Language. But even if you don't know that, I find the movement very symbolically strong. So I wanted to include it as a kind of reminder during the series. So while you're watching the images, every now and then you get this hands, and it's like a cut, as if, I don't know, in life you have those moments when somebody dies or something even less extreme happens, but you get reminded of your mortality. And I think also the title is something that I hear as a repetition, so as a repetitive phrase, not just something that you say, okay, we are the ones turning. It's more like, we are the ones turning, we are the ones turning, you know.
I really love this. I feel very passionate about what you've done to show this work, to show these hands. It looks, it's actually, you can't see, I'm getting a bit emotional. I am a bit like that. I just love this so much. It's I just love that so much.
I'm happy to hear.
You know, I could go into technicalities of why I love it so much, but I think people can see. So we'll not embarrass myself right now. That was actually the next question about the hands, but we've already covered it. We're flying through it. It's fantastic. So the box around it, was that like a technical decision, or was it was that kind of designed
or was it made this for an exhibition, which also happened within Parallel. So I made it in collaboration with the curator, who I think it was Eric Lawton from New York. He was really fascinated by the technicality of the device, whereas I was fascinated by the way it's actually built, because it has this mechanism which is really similar to a clock mechanism. And I was constantly talking about how every human being has an internal clock, and like our own internal rhythm, which is like of breathing, of walking, of, I don't know, this kind of functions. And I felt I really connect the gesture to that. So if you ask somebody to do it, everybody has a kind of different pace of performing it. And I even imagine to have more of those flipbooks sat next to each other, so you would have this slight differences. But I just remembered I forgot to answer your previous question, partly, because there's another thing about repetition, which you see, for example, between the portraits of two girls, which are almost the
Yeah.
same.
Let me share these quickly.
Yeah, so this, I'll wait for you to open.
I'm just trying to, yeah, there we go. Oh, this is Michael's work. It's just loading. It'll come up in a moment. There's a little preview of what's coming next. Let me just stop sharing that. I'm not sure why it's doing that. This one, please. No, it still keeps wanting to share, Michael, your work. It's just really keen on showing it. There we go. Oh, is that it? No. Let me try.
Keep it. Yeah, it's also about the diptych is called a slight difference between now and then, and you have first see one portrait and then you see other images in between, then you again see almost the same portrait, and it's like this deja vu feeling of temporal distortion, which you sometimes get, that something has just happened and then it happens again, but in that sense.
Yeah, so the last question specifically about this project that I have for you is, I was snooping on your website today, and I noticed that this is an ongoing project. Is that still? So I was just wondering, where do you see this project going next, and do you think you'll ever know when it's finished?
Yeah, so initially the idea was because, as I said, it was finished really quickly, and I had to present it before I felt this was completely finished. I always wanted to go on with it, but I can say that honestly, I've left this chapter behind a bit, and I'm focusing more on developing a counterpart to it, which will be, perhaps I end up showing them together. So my new project, which is, it's called Immortality is Commonplace, about immortal plants, and has it's a little bit more conceptual and visually different, but I think it still works nicely together, and it's really connected. So I don't know, we probably don't have much time to go into that, but
did you mention where that was? That project is underway, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
this is what I'm going to show during the Futures Festival.
Great. I'm really looking forward to it. Michael, should we talk about your work?
Yeah.
Okay. So the title of your project, am I correct in saying that it's Noema?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Oh, great. I'm smashing it today. So where does that name come from?
So you'll have to forgive me because I spent like 3 months researching it, and I've still not worked out an accurate way of or a concise way of articulating what it means. But essentially, phenomenology, as you kind of mentioned before, was founded by a guy called Edmund Husserl, who used the term noema to basically refer to the object of a thought or a perception as it appears in your consciousness. So if you kind of take for the idea that the way that we interact with the outside world or the real world and the way that we perceive it is always translated through our senses. Phenomenology kind of takes as its basis the idea that it's difficult to make any concrete judgments about the real world without that kind of clouding anything. And so the noema is kind of one of his ways of trying to work out how we can learn anything concrete about the real world by kind of paring our experiences down to their pure feelings and their pure kind of, looking at consciousness as a thing in itself. And one of the things that he talks about specifically is how even things like hallucinations and visions have noemas, despite the fact that the object that's being perceived isn't necessarily visible to everyone in the outside world. And I liked that idea in relation to the idea of religious experience and apparitions, in particular the two apparition sites that I look at in noema, because what I'm trying to do really with the work is create almost like a noema in the mind of the viewer of the Virgin Mary, without actually showing representations of her. So kind of alluding to her or trying to find signs of her presence.
Yeah, so I think you explained it very well there, about what the project is about. Is apparitions of the Virgin Mary, and the two places. Is it two places that it was photographed? It's about.
Yeah. So there are two places. There's Garabandal, which is in the north of Spain, where there were four young girls around the ages 11 and 13 who had almost daily apparitions for about 4 years in the 1960s.
Oh, wow.
And then the second place is Medjugorje, which is in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where 6 teenagers or young children had visions pretty much daily, starting in 1981, and have continued. Some of them still have them fairly regularly to this day. Yeah, and I went to both those sites and basically kind of looked for signs of a presence there, or tried to capture some of the aura that surrounds the locations based on the context of those stories.
And so had you been there prior to the project?
No, I actually hadn't before researching into. So the project started off really as to look at religious experience as a kind of wider theme, and it eventually can kind of condense down, partly because I think that representing the whole topic of religious experience is kind of a big ask. And it was through the research of looking into that as a subject as a whole that I came across both of these places and decided to kind of hone in on them specifically. Yeah.
And what was your experience shooting there and being in that place? Did it without trying to get a headline out of it, but did you experience any sense of spirituality or anything whilst you were around there? Was there a sense of that?
Yeah, so the two locations are, I would say, almost polar opposites in terms of the way that they've evolved since the apparitions occurred. So Garabandal is a really tiny village in the Cantabrian Mountains, and to get there I had to fly, and then I had to get a 2.5-hour bus, and then I had to get a 45-minute taxi just to get there.
Yeah.
And there are no food shops. There are like 2 restaurants that you can eat at. There's nowhere to buy anything other than religious memorabilia. So it's totally the opposite of any experience I've ever had before. And it's an incredibly spiritual and mystical location, I would say. I think because it's tucked away in the mountains, and because it's so small, and because it's quite it's kind of flown under the radar a little bit in terms of pilgrimage sites or sites of pilgrimage. That it's incredibly quiet, and it's really beautiful, and there's this kind of silence that's immediately noticeable. And I was raised a Catholic, and I was kind of educated in Catholicism, but I wouldn't consider myself a Catholic now. But it's the kind of place that forces you to stop and really really kind of spend time with the landscape, and spend time with the reasoning why I was there, and really kind of thinking about what people who do come to this place, and people who are looking for something there, what they might gain from it or what they might experience. I really enjoyed shooting there. I think it's a really beautiful place.
It looks stunning.
Yeah, Medjugorje is very different because I think because the apparitions are still happening today, it's grown into something more on a par with Lord, in the sense that it's fairly commercial. There's definitely an industry there with pilgrimage, and the atmosphere is different. It's much easier to kind of. I think with Garabandal it was interesting because you couldn't. As soon as I arrived in the village, it's almost like everyone knew that there was someone new there. Whereas Medjugorje is totally different. You're almost anonymous. I find that shooting in both locations with those things in mind quite interesting to compare. But yeah, I got some of the most, I would say, the most kind of classically spiritual looking images in Medjugorje. So yeah, I think they both still kind of possess something, I would say.
Yeah, you mentioned this very briefly when you were speaking about that, about your kind of, I guess, I don't know whether it's your relationship or your history with religion, but I was just wondering, you know, how do you think that has impacted your relationship with it personally, has impacted this project, or has it had impact on this project?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, I went to a Roman Catholic primary school, so my education for the first 10, 11 years of my life was through the filter of Catholicism. My mother's side of the family is Irish Catholic, so I've always had that influence, and I think to some extent it kind of defined the way I saw a lot of aspects of the world and how I interacted with aspects of the world. And I think it has worked its way into the way that I look at art and the way I look at photography. Before I started my BA, I became really interested in Renaissance art, and in particular kind of, you know, the works that are in the Vatican, and you know, Raphael and Michelangelo. And I think that imagery, and because Catholicism is a really visual religion and they rely on that to some extent, I think it kind of inevitably seeped into the work.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting to hear. Just as a side note, obviously, well, I'm Irish, you can probably tell. My mum's also Catholic, and as well, whenever I was studying my BA, I was very heavily influenced by religious art and by Renaissance art. So yeah. It seems to just be something that seems like quite a natural thing. And I don't know what, I'm not going to ask you what your background is because it's not relevant to your work, but it seems like quite a natural thing to look at.
Yeah, I think there's those kind of those archetypal images of Jesus and Mary that are up in every Irish Catholic household, and you know, when I see other people who are Catholic making work, or Irish Catholic making work about religion, those same images seem to come up in their work that I saw in my nan's hallway when I was younger. And I feel like that would inevitably permeate through to the work that you make if you're looking at something spiritual or religious. Yeah.
And color. Should we talk about color?
Yeah, why not?
I feel like it's something, it was one of the, you know, besides obviously the beautiful imagery and the very kind of spiritual sense that you get from looking at the work, your use of color is it seems very definite, and everything, you know, for in particular these really striking red, like almost blood red photographs. I was just wondering what kind of the significance is to these in the work, and why you decided to create images exactly like this for this project.
Yeah, so quickly to talk about some of the other color ones, because it leads on quite nicely from what we were saying before, this one in particular. One of the things that when I was trying to think about how, as a child, I visualized the Virgin Mary, one of the things that came up was this color combination of white and blue. And so this particular image was one of the first images I took when I was in Garabandal, and it immediately kind of made that connection with the way that I visualized this person that I was trying to visualize through my work. And so the color aspect there is quite important. And then with the red images, there are only about 5 red images in the series, and I kind of like to think of them almost as punctuation to the rest of the work. But they ended up becoming quite an interesting way for me to reflect on some of the ideas that were in my research that I didn't necessarily put into the actual final project. So the context surrounding both of these locations in terms of their place within Europe in the mid to late 20th century, they're both within the contexts of conflict. Obviously with World War II and several, like I think it was about 30 or 40 years before Garabandal there was the Spanish Civil War, and post Medjugorje starting there was of course the Bosnian War as well. That kind of idea of I always found that really interesting in terms of what that meant for the apparitions themselves, and the messages that were being given to the children by the Virgin Mary. So, for example, in both cases, they make direct reference to communism, and also direct reference to this kind of post-apocalyptic warning, whereby if the messages that were being given by the Virgin Mary in these two places weren't kind of heeded by humanity, then there would be this this kind of what's the word? Yeah, almost like an apocalypse.
Yeah.
In Garabandal, the four girls were shown visions by the Virgin of this kind of hellish landscapes that would happen if the warnings weren't heeded, and I found that really interesting, given the kind of the context of Europe in the 20th century, or in the mid to late 20th century. This was kind of a way for me to get in that idea of this kind of post-apocalyptic, like a warning, or like the darker side to what was being shown to these girls, and to look at the kind of conflict surrounding the stories. I mean, I'm glad that you described them as blood red, because I think that blood red is also quite synonymous with Catholicism, and the visuals of sin and
the blood.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, the first image you think of whenever you think of Catholicism is the cross, which is obviously has now been kind of created to be this very like peaceful image, but is really quite a gory image whenever you think about what's actually going on.
Yeah. So yeah, those were. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily something that any viewer would immediately see in the work, but I like the idea that red. Obviously, it's kind of a choice, and I think as you picked up, it was something that was there for a reason. And I like the fact that it kind of brings up those questions about what that might mean, and then it allows viewers hopefully to draw those connections and those symbolisms. And even if it's just that kind of red of Catholicism, or the red of blood, or the red of sin, or something, it starts to kind of lead down the path to more metaphors and symbols.
Yeah. And I read a quote from an article on BJP Online. Actually, I've already asked you this question, so I do apologize. I won't ask you this one. It was about recontextualizing the world. So you've already covered that, so let's not ask you it again. But the other question that I really wanted to ask you about was the portraits, which I find, they're quite almost jarring against these. Let me get an example of them. Quite jarring against these really beautiful landscapes that you have, because obviously the very red images are quite striking, but the landscapes with the blue and the white are peaceful, and there's a process behind this, that it obviously isn't just simply just taking a photograph of a person. Can you describe a little bit about the process of how you created this image, or a few of these other images which I'll show while you're speaking? Yeah,
sure. So when I started making the work, I realized that there needed to be some kind of human presence there. But given what I was trying to achieve with the project, it didn't necessarily feel appropriate to go there and photograph the pilgrims, or to photograph people who believed, or to photograph witnesses or anything like that, because I didn't feel like that would offer anything in the way of advancing the search for presence, or the atmosphere of the project. And what I really wanted was to show images of the visionaries as they were experiencing these visions. So these are all taken from video footage that's just kind of archive, that were taken by witnesses at the time, or by locals to the two places, and they were then projected onto a TV screen and photographed on film. And what I liked was that through my work, I was trying to kind of tap into maybe something phenomenological and metaphysical, and trying to kind of try and understand what it would feel like to have these experiences, or represent my experience of being in those locations and searching for these kind of presences or auras. And also at the same time trying to I guess, come to terms with the fact that regardless of how many questions you have, or regardless of how much you want to find these answers, ultimately the experiences lie within the consciousness of the visionaries themselves, and there's no way you're ever going to really understand what their experiences were. And so this was really, I guess, trying to build that barrier between the visionaries and the viewer, and highlight the fact that ultimately it's an individual experience that we can put faith in, or we can be skeptical about, or however you respond to it. But ultimately the pixel barrier and the film grain and the kind of degradation of the video is hopefully trying to kind of portray the idea that there is a separation between the viewer and the experience of the visionary.
Yeah. I think a question that I had, and I don't know, it was just something that I was thinking about, I don't know if this was the intention, but you know, kind of bringing in, while it's being shown on a screen, it kind of, to me, automatically brings in the idea of technology. And I'm just wondering if, you know, was it intentional for you to speak about, or to kind of make me specifically, don't know if anyone else thinks about this, but think about, you know, faith in the modern age and in the day of technology?
It wasn't intentional, but I like it. I mean, I chose the two sites because they were contemporary, and because they had, I felt, more of a connection to yeah, well, I mean, some of them are still happening now. So it's almost like saying that these things aren't just kind of something that you read about from hundreds of years ago. They're things that are happening to this day.
Yeah.
And I like the idea that they could reference, you know, religion in the modern age. It wasn't intentional, but I can see why you would draw those connections. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. I'm going to stop sharing this now so everyone can see our lovely faces. So just a couple more questions for the two of you. I'm looking at the time, and we are unfortunately running low, so I'm not sure how many questions we'll be able to go through at the end. But I think something that I have been asking everyone, and everyone's probably sick of me asking the question, but I do persevere, is what has your experience been, kind of, how have you been since the 23rd, well, in the UK it was the 23rd of March, and I'm not sure how long it's been for you, but what has it been like for you, kind of creating work since the pandemic hit? Should we start with you? Because I know that Michael, I think I saw that you made some work in Italy, is that correct?
Yeah, so I was actually in Sicily in March, which was a very interesting experience, considering we flew out, I think it was on the Friday the 5th or the 6th or something like that, whichever was the Friday. And I think on the Saturday, Italy announced that they would be going into lockdown, and then by Monday it was in lockdown. And so we'd been thinking we'd be able to spend maybe 2 weeks there, which, considering it's, you know, the opposite end of Italy from where I think the majority of the cases were. Yeah, it was still very interesting. And so we ended up having to get an emergency flight home the following Friday, because I think they were closing flight routes after that. So at the time I was reading The Melancholy of Resistance by Laszlo Krasznahorkai, which is a really amazing book about a small kind of Hungarian town where this kind of looming ominous change is kind of in the air, and people are a bit on edge, and everything's a bit uncertain, and it ends up manifesting in this circus that rolls into town that brings with it the world's largest whale, and ends up causing the town to descend into this chaos. And the opening chapter is really all about fear of other people and being on a crowded train, and this imagery of this woman kind of clutching her handbag to her chest because there are so many people around and she's anxious. And I was just kind of reading this thinking, this is really strange, and especially in the current context, it's quite interesting. So yeah, I kind of used that time in Sicily to try and respond to that book more than anything, but also in light of what was happening at the time. Yeah.
Anna, how have you been?
Good. First of all, I really love Krasnohorkai. I have to say it. But yeah, luckily I was able to travel to produce some new work in July when Slovenia was on a green list. So it was really not something dangerous to do. So everything I made now that I'm going to show for futures is basically a recent work. So it hasn't affected me that much. But in terms of exhibitions and projects, yes, of course, it's a different way of working, and I didn't like it at the beginning, but I have to say that being forced to put my work online, because I really don't see it online otherwise, it's not something I like to do. But in the case of futures, we had so much freedom to create our own vision of it that I'm beginning to like it, and I think it's a good challenge.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. I'm very glad to hear that. You know, the whole idea of, I think there's a very kind of push-pull between photography and the internet. And you know, kind of there's obviously different people prefer different ways in how photography should be seen. But I think it's been really interesting seeing people respond, creating work that is made for the digital space that don't usually create work for the digital space. I find it fascinating and I love it, and I think it's great. But slightly more, another really broad question, and probably really difficult one. So what drew you over, you know, any other medium? What drew you to photography to kind of tell your stories or to create your work? Anna, should we start with you?
Sure. I'm not sure I can answer it really well, but for me, because I used to do graphic design, what I felt was that if you have something that you clearly want to research and explore, I felt that through design, of course, you're free to do everything you want, but at the same time, it's a bit more limited than photography. I feel photography is much easier to just take notes if you want to, or to make it a bit broader, to circle around the subject and to get closer to it gradually, while in design you have to have the vision from the beginning and kind of make it really straightforward. So that was for me the reason why I switched eventually.
Yeah, and I think for me, I just really enjoyed the process. I think I like the fact that it relies to some extent on something that's external to myself, and so instead of having full control over, I mean, I guess you do have full control to some extent, but I like the idea that instead of creating something from scratch, you're looking for something instead. And so I'm looking for, you know, ways to articulate what I'm thinking through something that already exists, or something that you know, come across. Yeah, I don't know if that's.
Yeah, it does completely answer the question. I think Anna, you have answered this question, and Michael, you may have even answered this question as well. So I apologize if this isn't if you can just say we've already done it. So do you have any projects on the horizon? You know, are you planning anything at the minute? Obviously, don't give us too many details because we'll have to wait to see it. But
so I think for me, the focus with Noema is going to be hopefully kind of getting it exhibited and focusing on the book format for it, because I have a book dummy that I've been working on, and I've been trying to develop an interesting way of showing the work in exhibition format. I think that'll be the focus for a while. I have in the last couple of weeks, because I've been in quarantine after being in France, I have been trying to use that as almost like a kind of research residency to force myself to start looking at the next project. And so I've started kind of putting ideas together for something else, but at the moment it's maybe too early to say anything concrete.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, for me, the new project about immortality, I would say that what's the biggest step or the biggest difference from previous work is that it's a bit more medium reflective, which is probably a consequence of me having just finished a master in theory. Well, what can you do? So I'm focusing on the lichen as so lichen as this symbiotic organism of fungus, algae, and bacteria, which I think is a really interesting subject to explore right now with all the climate change and kind of really precarious environmental conditions, because it's something that could potentially. We lost.
You're back. We lost you just a little bit there.
Okay, so yeah, why I think it's interesting because it's not an individual, it's a symbiotic growth. It can live technically forever, so it doesn't die by getting old, or it doesn't have this that sentence in itself. Simply, it just goes on living if it has, of course, the right conditions, and because it depends on clean air, it's kind of, I find it a perfect thing to do right now. And what's the point of my project is basically that by taking pictures of something immortal, you're doing something completely senseless, because photography is the medium that we say immortalizes things. And it creates a clash between the medium and the reference. So who is going to live longer, photography or lichens? That's
so interesting.
That's the twist.
Yeah, I love that. It's so interesting. I think that's a really great way to end. I've just had a look at the clock and we're already over by 10 minutes. So we might need to leave it there. But thank you both so much for coming on and spending the evening with me. I've loved picking your brain about your fabulous work. And everyone, as I said beforehand, if you're interested in the Futures Festival, which is happening over October, futures-photography.com, you can have a look there and you'll see these guys' work, and also our other nominated people who Alina Maria Frisk, David Uzochukwu, and Agnieszka Sijut, and then also there are several other members who have nominated some more incredible talent there. So definitely have a look. If you're in need of any sort of inspiration, you will 100% find it there. So do take a look at it. But thank you, Michael and Anna, for joining us this evening. Thank you so much. And everyone else, have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you again next week. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.